Okay, should we get cranked up again? Just to pull that example of true goody-goody, that what you have is you kind of have a tension between abstract, decontextualized, principle-based, virtue-based morality. So what you have is you have abstract principle and abstract human beings. What we have to do is we have to apply the same abstract principle to all abstract human beings. And ethnicity and gender and generational differences are irrelevant when we're looking for justice. Maybe that idea of justice isn't sufficiently capacious. And so the contrast is with a holistic vision of the moral life, with a focus field conception of person. That each of us is a focus that sometimes is not unitary. Like we behave differently with our mothers than we behave with the lads in the bar. That hopefully, that we are different people in different circumstances, and so you have this kind of focus. We focus ourselves one way in one situation. We focus ourselves in a different way in a different situation. And so what we're doing is we're really looking, not only do we have to reconceive the underlying liberal vocabulary where freedom, equality, autonomy mean something very different, what we have to do is we have to look at some of these other metaphors. Like if I ask Tom, what does an acorn become? An oak tree. What does a chicken egg become? A chicken. What does a grain of corn become? A stalk of corn, That's our Greek tradition. You speak this language. Here's breaking news. 1 in a million acorns becomes an oak tree. Most of them become squirrels. 1 in a million chicken eggs becomes chickens. Most of them become omelets. 1 in a million kernels of corn become a stalk of corn. Most of them become cows. If we get away from the idea that potential is something that is individuated, and we understand that potential has to do with the transactions of a human narrative over time, where we can only say the potential of this young woman is something that we can only calculate after the narrative is done. And even then, given that she's influenced generations of people, then it goes on, even beyond the narrative itself. And so words like root, we take this term in Buddhism, Peter. We take this notion of Banshin, and we translate this as original mind. But this is root. But we think of roots as origins. My father was an apple farmer. And I'm here to tell you that you don't first have a root and then a tree. It doesn't work that way. You have roots and trees, they grow together or they don't grow at all. That roots are branches underground and branches are roots reaching to the sky. That this is a holistic thing. Source, you don't have a source and then you have a creature. You don't have human nature that is reduplicated in the human being. Human nature is something that emerges as each one of us lives a life and contributes to this ongoing stream called humanity, where anthropology ought to give way to zoology. I think that's really a good. And Stanley was saying something that I think is very, very important, and that is that the role of the teacher. I go back to Hong Kong, and I was a student in Hong Kong in the 60s, before there was a Zhongmen Daihao. There were still just colleges. There wasn't a Chinese university. And the friends that I had as a kid, in those days, we were young people, and there were stones in the rice and nothing in the soup. And we lived 6 people in a room, and everybody had spots, It was shanty huts, and it was Hong Kong before it developed. Now I go back to Hong Kong, and all my classmates, they all drive Mercedes-Benz. and they all want to take me for dinner because I'm the scholar, you know. They went into business, they did this, but the scholar has a role. So the idea of the teacher, like why is the teacher so important in this tradition? It's because that intergenerational transmission, the shell for everybody, the ru for the literati, you know, generation after generation is based on modeling. The way that you teach somebody to be shall, you don't say to your kids, you be shall, you do this, you do that. That's not the way. What they do is they watch you in your behavior to the generation that came before, and they model themselves on your conduct. They follow you and embody what you do in terms of their own life experience. So that the idea of teacher, the idea of education, is so closely linked to this notion of shall, you know, just jiao, you know, jiao shou, you know, is a jiao and shall. So we have to reconceive the way in which we think about some of these terminologies and get away from the idea, like when you are working in a tradition, when you're thinking in a tradition, an Abrahamic tradition, where truth and beauty and goodness belong to some kind of creative act way up front, and where everything is derivative and playing that out, a kind of a linear teleology, you know, that life is directed towards something. That's one way of thinking where origins become really important. You know, we go back to, if we can find the source, then all will be transparent. That's not the way cosmogony works in the Chinese tradition. In the Chinese tradition, as you go back, it becomes increasingly dark. That you have a tradition where significance is aggregating. That meaningful relationships, as we appreciate each other, we appreciate the cosmos. That meaning emerges out of relationships lived well. It's not something that is up front, that is playing itself out. It has to do with harmony achieved in the specific relationships, that not abstracted relationships, these relationships, Brian, you know, and Stanley and Dorothy, these relationships that are our names in this particular situation. So one way of thinking about this concept of person is to take Chinese medicine. Who is it? Gracie is health. Where's Gracie? Oh, she stepped out. I saw her over here. Yeah, she does health. When somebody said that, I was thinking we got to get her into Chinese medicine. You know, that Chinese medicine. If you think about the heart-mind in Chinese medicine as a way of thinking about what it means to be a person, like the heart-mind cannot be isolated. If you isolate the heart-mind for a moment, it will be a dead piece of meat. And so the heart-mind, physiologically, like when the Chinese doctor is not taking your pulse, is listening to your body and listening to the way in which the different organs in your body are functioning, if everything is if no stagnation, not too hot, not too cold, if yit hey, you know, this kind of stuff, you know, that if your body is working properly, then internally, the internal landscape is good, but the internal landscape is dependent upon the external landscape, your nutrients, the sunshine, you know, the air that you breathe. And so the heart-mind, at the end of the day, is a focus of relationships that extend to the furthest ends of the cosmos. And that's physiologically, but if we think in terms of like the heart-mind in the Chinese tradition is thinking and feeling, both in the same place. There's not this kind of thinking and feeling. That thinking and feeling are what your heart-mind does. And so if your social relationships, if your interactions with other people, if everything is good with the family, if everything is good at the workplace, then there's no stagnation, there's no blockage. Then you're living a healthy life. And so this idea of the heart-mind is really a good way of thinking about what it means to be a human being. That if you ask the question, 我了解，可是那个心最后本身是什么东西? You know, what is the heart mind in itself? That's not a question. You know, the heart mind is precisely that focus of relationships. There's nothing. It's an onion. If you take away the relationships, there's nothing there. That things are constituted by relationships. That's good science. That's good science. We gave up on the idea of mass long ago, you know, that mass is something inside something. Mass is a differential between something that is more, has a greater degree of inertia than the things around it. But in the fullness of time, we dust into dust, you know. That mass dissolves. You don't have that idea of something inside that makes it what it is.
Since you're related, well, everything's energy, and you know that's what quantum mechanics brought us. And then you have, but the Chinese said this concept of qi, which you're talking about, was kind of connected with the wave energy.
But the problem that we have with the way that most people think about qi, I have a student who teaches at Kent State now, Kim Jong-yup, Korean, who did a dissertation on qi. The problem with the way that most people think about qi is that qi is kind of like an Aristotelian substance. It's a kind of a monism. You know, that qi is sort of the ocean, that everything folds back. No, qi has to do with both particularity, conjunctions and transitions, as well as substance. It's not only what things are, but how they are, and that we have to understand. You know, it's not sort of this amorphous energy, you know, that so qi is one of those terms that really requires careful consideration. Yeah.
Is it and I'm cheating here because I've read some of your work and others. Would it be considered, or could it be an easy vehicle to use to enter into these kind of conversations from west to east, by thinking in terms of William James' two truths, truth of the observer and the truth of the will, where the observed truth would be human nature in our kind of Platonic sense, as opposed to will, as opposed to that cultivated, kind of transmitted continuity that's brought about by human action, the scholar, the teacher, the parent, to subsequent generation. So it gives us I'm speaking for myself, it gives a kind of Western mind dichotomy to substantial issues of those domains that are in our language.
William James is very useful in fact, the whole 20th century in Western philosophy, when you think of the 20th century as a rejection of Platonism. So if you're talking about hermeneutics, postmodernism, pragmatism, existentialism, all of these different movements, what they share in common is the rejection of formalism, the rejection of eidos, the rejection of the idea that there is one foundational and causal principle that is responsible for everything. And so James, I mean, really the beginning of pragmatism is Principles of Psychology, where he wants to get away from the idea of the old psychology, you know, where there's something inside here called a mind, you know, the mystery of the mind, where mind is something that we do together. You know, you don't have a mind and therefore you speak and thereby we become like-minded. The chimpanzee, you know, the idea that get away from the mind-body thing, and what we do is we just have increasingly complex gestures, where those gestures become feelings, where those feelings become meanings, where red becomes stop. And so as we become increasingly complex animals, we have a mind. You don't have a heart. You don't have a heart, and therefore you feel other people. But because we have these feelings, what happens is we become wholehearted, you know, as a community. That heart is something that we do together, you know. So that you have a sociology as opposed to an individuated. And then you get away from the mystery of the mind. The mind, hey, do you remember what you were doing when you were 6 months old?
Kind of.
I know what most of us were doing when we were 6 years old and 6 months old, and we want to get past that in a hurry.
I thought you said 6 years.
No, 6 months. Oh, did I say 6 years? I meant 6 months. The whole idea is that gradually mind comes into focus. By the time you're 2 or 3 years old, you have some kind of memory of what happened and so on. That mind emerges in the communication. Emerges in the complexity of the human animal. I mean, so you don't have these kind of mind-body dualism. You don't have dualism. Now, and so what you end up with, if you think in terms of the definition of mind that we find, Gracie, in Chinese medicine, what you have is holistic concept of mind. It's a focus, there's a center, but it just goes out, it doesn't stop anywhere. And then you have a focus field conception. It's processual. It's relational. You isolate it, and it's a dead piece of meat. It's gerundive, not verbal, but gerundive. The idea that it's a verbal noun. In translating the Chinese tradition, we were talking about this, Dorothy, that if you look at your dictionaries, you look at the Shuo and Jie Zi, the earliest dictionaries, the Arya and so on. You look at these early dictionaries, and what happens is nouns are defined in terms of verbs, or in terms of gerunds. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look in the dictionary or the early texts for this exemplary person, Jun, it's defined in terms of chun, in terms of gathering together. If you look for Wang, it is defined in terms of Wang. The person, the true king is the person that people repair to. If you ask the question, what is Dao? This term that we use so much. Dao is Dao. Is to tread, to trek, is trekking, is walking. And so all of these terms that you use, what is a paronomastic definition? A definition by semantic and phonetic association. Jun, chun, Wang, Wang, Dao, Dao. What you're doing is you're defining terms. It's sort of like so. We have different ways of saying so. Or can. Can is a good term. Like, it's in the can. I can do. Or yes, we can. Just a little bit of politics today. Get off your can. He got canned. That can has all of these different meanings. And if you put them in relationship to each other, you can generate that wisdom in this tradition is not a reality behind appearance. This kind of epistemic vocabulary of grasping, getting, comprehending, that the epistemic vocabulary in the Chinese tradition is mapping. 知道, I know the way. Is 了解, 理解. I can unravel the pattern, is 通达, I can penetrate. That the knowing is a reservoir of correlations. I think about when you go to the doctor, how does a doctor deal with you? Is it reality behind appearance, or is it the reading and the experience and correlations that the doctor is making in terms of a particular condition? That wit and wisdom, that kind of a relationship, that being able to make the correlations is the way in which we act wisely. So it's not, we knowledge and opinion. We teach epistemology. We don't teach Sophiology. We kind of gave up on wisdom in philosophy. If I put as an SLO, Sylvia, your student learning outcomes for assessment people, on my philosophy, if I put the student will become wise, that's not going to play, is it? It's not going to. It's true. It's true. If I go to the chairman of my department and I say I want to teach a course on wisdom, he's going to say, go to the religion department, and talk to them, but don't embarrass us, I mean, we're in philosophy. We care about knowledge. We don't care about wisdom. And it's that same thing about reason and emotion, that the reason that reason is really so important is because it has universal pretensions. Impersonal reason will get us justice, whereas emotions have to do with intimacy. They have to do with particularity. So they get in the way. That's Kant, where you have a non-empirical self. The self is like, or Phaedo, Plato, where self is, it doesn't have to do with life in the world. It has to do with something that stands outside of empirical experience. But I want to get to something because I really want to try to think through. Today we're in the business of trying to. I was really interested in what Stanley had to say about. Oh, this is beautiful. About inhabiting, and so I want to kind of play with inhabiting. That idea that we've been talking about embodying, one generation embodying the next, the idea of cultural transmission, where one Ru, generation after generation of Ru, embodies the tradition, uses it, and then passes it on to the next. And so these are the oracle bones, and this is really quite wonderful. One thing that we have this term, Ren, and everybody's fascinated. Like, this really helps us as teachers, because even if we don't know Chinese, we know that this is person, and we know this is the number 2, and so then we can say the Chinese concept of consummate person, the way that we become consummate as persons, is in our relationships. It's 2. And can you imagine how disappointed people were when we discover in the Guodian text that this term Ren is not written as person and 2, but is written as body, a profile of the body, and the heart-mind. And so you say, well, then I can't tell my story about how it's relational. But if we look at the oracle bones, we find that this body is an impregnated body. It's a body with child. And so you can't get anywhere, you can't get relationality that is more intimate and more collateral than the idea of 2 human beings sharing a body, So these oracle bones, we have this project in Hong Kong at Chinese University, a man named Guan Ziyin, where what we're doing is we all know that Chinese characters, we talk about can, okay? Let's have a little bit of fun here. I just gave a litany of can. If I use this radical beside can, what does that mean? What is this radical? Not yue. Ro. Meat. So then I'm talking about this can. If I put this character beside it, what am I talking about? A jinzapang. Tin can. If I put this radical beside it, foot radical. Somebody just got canned. Yeah. And so on. You put this radical beside it. Li, strength. I can, yes we can, So that Chinese, these radicals have semantic force. As soon as you see a tree, then you know that the character has something to do with tree. But then the evolution of the Chinese language is really complex, and so sort of hieroglyphics and ideograms and so on, that these give way to a much more complex way of creating the characters. But when we go back to the pre-stylized characters, the characters on the bronzes and on the oracle bones, they tell us a lot. They give us additional information. And one good example of that is that on the oracle bones, we find Lao in this way. You think of that picture of Albert Einstein, with the hair. This is Albert Einstein leaning on a cane. And so then it gets stylized so that it looks kind of like this character. This is your modern character, gets stylized. But then the oracle bones, the term for shell, is Albert Einstein, but not leaning on a cane, but leaning on the young generation, the generation that came before. And so these early forms of writing really do have semantic content that we can use. And so just to finish up this, I want to get on to something else, but this is an important passage because what it tells us is it says, exemplary persons concentrate their efforts on the root. For the root having taken hold, one's vision of the life will grow therefrom. Ban li, or Dao Shang, that when the root is set, then Dao grows therefrom. Dao is something that's a living. It's something that's it's a vision of the moral life that is under construction. It's not something that is, it's not, I am the truth, the way, and the light, where the way is a done deal. The way is something that we participate in, that grows out of the human experience. And so then what is the root? As for family reverence and fraternal deference, the idea of intergenerational transmission, but also internal generational transmission. I am Tom's mentor. I'm the older brother. This kind of this relationship here. So you have that kind of transmission both within one generation and intergenerational. So these two ideas capture that idea. As for family reverence and fraternal deference, these are, I suspect, the root of becoming consummate in one's person. So shell has that is the ground, in the sense that it's out of shell that we are able to develop this possibility of becoming consummate. Hang on for a sec, though. And then another one, this is really also important. You tell me, what do you see in this passage? As a son and a younger brother, be reverent in familial relations at home and be deferential to elders in the community. Be cautious in what you say and then make good on your word. Love the multitude broadly and be intimate with those who are consummate in their conduct. If in so behaving you still have energy enough, if you have energy left, use it to improve yourself through more academic pursuits. Can you read this in Cantonese? Yeah. If you wanted to hear how Confucius would have spoken, this idea of Mandarin is really a new thing, over the last couple of centuries. But if Confucius, if we were able to resuscitate him, he would speak much more like Cantonese. So read the language in Cantonese.
Dạ, 弟子入則孝，出則弟，謹而信，凡愛眾而親仁，行有餘力，則以學問。
That would be Confucius. Yeah. But what you see in here is several things to take away from this passage. The first thing to take away is that you're always talking about radiality, focus field, that be good at home, and then be good in the community, and then be good with the multitude. That the passages themselves give you this kind of radiality. And the second thing is that education, hokman, that education has to do with becoming a person. And then if you've got a little bit of time left, read a book. You know, that education, the focus of the education is really not on academics. It's on it's on relational virtuosity. We want to get away from language like character and self and person and so on. That these ideas, Dewey talks about the retrospective fallacy. Like what I know of Peter is decades of a narrative together, you know, hanging out, drinking local brew. We're going to do that today, you know. You got good local beers here. Okay, but it's a narrative. But then I go back and I retrospectively I think about Peter, and I think Peter and the narrative. I separate them. But that's not the story. Like the story is the narrative itself. And that's where you get the gerundive. Like if we're translating the Chinese tradition, we have to go to the gerund. It's personing. You know, it's not person and ing. It's person and doing. It's not agent and action. It's relational virtuosity, aggregating relational virtuosity over time. You know. So now, what I wanted to get to is concrete conduct is source of principles. We talked about that. And we talked about the importance of family, but what I wanted to get to is Hilary Putnam is our Harvard pragmatist, you know, a brilliant man. He talks about the human face of realism. And the point he wants to make is this, that the mind and language penetrate so deeply into experience that the idea that you could map something called a world independent of your mind and language is a non-starter, you know. That what we have is we have experience. One of the big problems that we have in terms of the way in which we've been thinking comes out of a Platonic tradition, where you have a mind and you have a world, you have a sensory apparatus that somehow or other distorts perceptions, you have perceptions and conceptions, and so all of this stuff, we start from things are separated, and you're trying to put them together. Kant, you know, perception, conception, and imagination, putting the two things together. The empiricists, you know, and so on. Wrong beginning. The beginning is experience. If you want to know what objectivity means, then how is objectivity experienced? What is it experienced as? If you want to ask what is justice, what is it experienced as? The idea that we have experience that have conceptual structure and all the rest of this kind of stuff, theorize the world, to say that that's not the way the world really is. What is the world in itself is that same problem of asking what is the heart-mind in itself. The heart-mind is precisely this focus of roles and relationships. That's how it's constituted. And experience, what is red? Red isn't there. Red is a collaboration between whatever is there, the light and the retina. It's relational. That things in the world don't reside in things. Things in the world are relational. We begin from vital relationality and see experience that way. And so what you have in this tradition is you have sort of a reinforcement of what Putnam is saying, except what the Confucian is going to say is, if you talk about language and mind, that is 20th century Western philosophy, the linguistic turn. If you're going to talk about it, you have to talk about it holistically. And so the two terms that we want to use are T and Li. You know, that we embody the world. That Li is embodied roles and relationships, and T is roles and relationships embodied. You take this term body in the Chinese tradition. If we look at the text that we have, the earliest text, body is not simply written with there are 4 ways of writing body. One way is the standard way today. Second way is this way. Third way is this way. And fourth way is this way. This way is body written with bones, with skeleton, with a structure. And so the whole idea is that, so you talk about 体会. We understand a world, but to understand a world means to participate in it. It means to conceptualize it. It means to square the circle. It means to theorize. That if we didn't have bodies, the world wouldn't look the way it looks. That the world is a collaboration between us and our context, but our world. Experience is not something inside us. Experience is what we experience. And so one of the things that we do, beginning with 6 months, is gradually we 体会, we understand a world, we frame a world, we shape a world in a certain way. So that the structure, the skeletal structure, is what we do to the world, you know. And then the second way, the shen, this is the social body. The body, like you talk about what is 身份, you know, my identity, you know. That shen has to do with body in the world, social body. And so the vital, the existential body, you know, that body, in this tradition, we read Tang Juni from Hong Kong, great philosopher. He says, you know, we got to get away from thinking that, well, you know, that we learn about the human being through psychology. That what we do mostly in being a human being is we become one, and then we think about, what have I done, you know? What language can I find to talk about this, you know? And so this is lived body. This is Merleau-Ponty. This is body from the inside, the vital body, the existential body as lived. And then the third one is carnal body, is flesh and blood body, bone body. But then what we have is in the simplified characters, we have body written as human being, and again we got that term root. That the human experience is rooted in our physicality. Japanese way of writing body, you know, with this renzapang. So you can play with the characters, and they're really revealing of what's going on. Just to finish this, so you have this idea of T with these different classifiers. And so the body becomes a hugely important thing. In the Xiaojing, it says, your physical person with its hair and skin is received from your parents. Vigilance and not allowing anything to do injury to your person is where family reverence begins. You know, the idea that you keep your body intact, you know, that this is what you owe to your ancestors. You don't take your body back to you know, and so what you have in the Chinese tradition is ambulatory punishments. You know, cutting off the nose, cutting off a foot, cutting off different things, you know. No more of that. And so you have these kind of ambulatory punishments because or branding. What that does is that shames you, not only in this world, somebody with a brand, you know, we know that this is a ne'er-do-well, but also when you take the body back, you have the first, this is chapter 1 of the Xiaojing, that family reverence begins with vigilance with respect to your physicality. And that has to be read much bigger than that. Like, your physicality is what embodies the cultural tradition. And so it's not only that you can't allow your body to go back into to the tradition impaired, but you can't allow the cultural body, the corpus of literature, the body of music, that you can't allow culture to be diminished in the process of transmission. And so this idea of the body is really bigger than simply your physical body. And so in the language, the body, the living person is sheng shen, as a metaphor for parents. Bones and flesh, the gu rou are your children. Shu zu are your hands and feet are your brothers. Fu xin, your stomach and heart mind, are your friends. Tong bao, of the same womb, are your countrymen. That body is used in expressing the culture broadly. And so Ti Hui references the verbal body, a process of configuring, embodying, and knowing the world. We use our inclusive psychophysical sensorium to make, determinate, conceptualize, and theorize the human experience. So the body is the site of a conveyance of the cultural corpus of knowledge, linguistic facility and proficiency, religious rituals, mythologies, aesthetics of cooking, song and dance, modeling of mores and values, instruction, apprenticeship, and cognitive technologies, and so on, as a continuing intergenerational process through which a living civilization itself is perpetuated. But then the second term that is part of this. Instead of language and mind, you have the body, but then the other term that is cognate with it is this notion of li that we've talked about, the idea of roles and relationships. So what we do is we enroll the world. We make the world into daughters and husbands and grandparents, and we achieve. Just as we embody the world, and we embody the cultural tradition, we use it, we pass it on. We live our roles and relationships, we achieve meaning in them, and then we pass them on. This term here is very interesting. That in the Book of Songs, shati is a rhizome, is a goober, is a what are some of the other words for these? Is a rhizome? Yeah. What it is there another word?
Stones?
A tuber. A bulb is the same kind of thing. Yeah, what you have is like if you let a potato go to seed, and then you cut it up, the mother body lives on in the offspring. That when you think of there's a death in our tradition is a very funny thing. Death is unnatural. Like, we were born immortal, but then we messed up. And so we were punished. That death is divine animus. He's pissed, somebody's angry. And so out of labor, we perpetuate ourselves. And so there's something dark and unnatural about death. In this tradition, you don't really die. Like, the idea of having the last name first, that there's a continuity in terms of the surname where generations live on in the generations that follow. So this idea of the rhizome, the tuber, is kind of a way of thinking about that kind of continuity that you have as the family lineage passes on, and you see it physically, you see it culturally. As we inherit, embody, and transmit, the cultural tradition. So these two terms, rather than language and mind, I think are a Confucian way of trying to say the same thing. That experience, our experience as human beings, is this embodied living, and lived body. Let me just finish up, and then we talked about the role of friendship. There's one thing about it. I mean, I don't want to. When you think of role ethics, very often philosophical positions are really reflections of the way in which we want to organize society. Like if you think of Aristotle, what you've got is you've got an aristocratic elite, and then you have people, men, and then you have defective men, which are women, and then you have slaves. And so what we want to do, if we're the aristocratic elite, is we want to get everybody else to work really hard so that we can do theoria, we can be philosophers, we can think about the world. And so you really get a philosophical position that is determined in some way by value biases. That we shape the world, we define the world according to our values. But what you have here is you have, with this role ethics, you have the basic idea that we learn to love by being loved. You start from the fact that we all have a family. We live in a family life. Anybody here a test tube baby? There's not so many. That we, and if you were, then you would still find you'd still live within family relationships. And so the idea that we learn to love by being loved. That if a child, a baby, is not held and loved in the first hours, the first days, the first weeks of a child's life, the sociology of that child is put at risk. That the child has to have that kind of, and so loving is a response to that kind of relationship. The idea of the sense of shame, what's the difference between guilt and shame?
There's a lot. Agency. I mean, we can. How thoroughly would you like me to try to answer the question? But at the surface level, I mean, issues of agency and the context, defining the relationships that may be injured or damaged by agency as it's exercised by the objects or subjects in that context.
Is it good to have a sense of shame or not to have a sense of shame?
Proportionally. I think it is good in proportion, and it can also be bad in proportion.
Yeah, okay.
Contextually speaking.
Good. Okay, so contextual. I mean, shame has to do with a sense of a family, community. It has to do with what's your sense of self relative to the people who constitute your world. And having a sense of shame has to do with a sense of deference to the people. You want to live up to the family's expectations. A person without a sense of shame is a person who doesn't care what other people think. That's the most dangerous creature on the planet. Bam! I don't care what other people think. Those people who don't have that sense of context are frightening. They're sociopaths. So this idea of developing a sense of shame within the family, within the community that you live, is the ground of role ethics. Developing self-esteem. I have this woman, Mei-Lin Chin, who goes into our prison system and teaches philosophy. And the whole idea is that people lack self-esteem. Education within that environment is really an important way of responding in a positive way. Everyone has a family, So that is a kind of generalizability about this notion of role ethics. A person can only love by being loved, so family nurturance is not optional in the process of becoming moral. If other members of your family do better, 基于利而利人，基于大而大人, that if members of your family do better, you too do better, and by extension, if your neighbor does better, you do better. I mean, how do you do, this, we're pretty far north, but you got this thing on the southern border. You've got immigration coming across. What do you do about that? How do you respond to that? China's got a great wall, Changcheng. Build a wall along the border. Keep them out. Didn't work for China. The Mongols got in, the Manchus got in, so that didn't work there, Then there's sort of history where you got what was Texas anyway, and why is it Los Angeles, So you got sort of that kind of historical thing. So how do you respond to this situation? Well, when we look to the north, there's a border there too, but only a few of them are slipping in. Yeah. You don't have that same kind of streaming that you have in the south. So how do you respond to that kind of an issue? Well, if you think of it in terms of Confucian role ethics, what you recognize is the fact that the reason that Canada and America do well is because Canada and America. That more than half of American oil comes from the north. And with the Kirkland pipeline, if that happens, after we have the environmental studies and the rest of it, that's a political issue. But the fact of the matter is that historically, these two countries have collaborated, and as a result, both of their economies are thriving. We fight. You guys take too many salmon. Our water, it costs, electric bill in Canada costs $60 a month. Electric bill in Hawaii costs $400 a month. Canada uses water, Hawaii uses oil, So you have that, and so a lot of the water comes down from the north for America. So there's this very positive relationship. How do you get the relationship in the south to look like the north relationship in the north? And so just as a starting point, recognizing that it's the drug market in America that's the ultimate source of the problem. The guns are guns that originate in America. That you've got a military in Mexico that can't handle the cartels. You've got a complex situation. But the starting point is the end game has to be a kind of mutuality. It has to be finding a way forward that is win-win, as opposed to us and them. That it's infinite games, not finite games, that is going to solve that problem. Okay. Now let's just finish up on one last sentence, and that is that Confucianism is not the answer. That's not the argument. The argument is that intimate relationships, family, brothers and sisters, it all sounds very liberating, but it's also the source of corruption. That old boys networks, guanxi, that intimate relationships, the case that we've got in Chongqing right now is all about intimate relationships. There's all kinds of family in there, and that doesn't look very good. And so this, role ethics has to be updated. It has to be reauthorized. It has to have a structure that includes regulative ideals of some kind. That principle, words like justice have to be more prominent within this world, particularly in a global context. Where when Confucius was around, everybody in town had the same name. You go to Chufu, And everybody tells you, oh, 我是孔子的后代, you know. I'm the latter generation Confucius. Half of the town is named Kong, you know, in his home. And that was the way it was, you know, where 3 generations in a house and so on. We live in a different world now. And so regulative ideals become an even more impressing and important issue. But, I mean, the ultimate argument is that this way of thinking, this idea that we have to begin from vital relationality, we have to begin from infinite games, that this is an important insight. And so China ought to have its place at the table in a discussion of how does the human being move forward. Thank you. I think we still got about 10 minutes, Sylvia, for a conversation? Yeah. Okay. I mean, first off, just if we go back and we think about the images that we saw with Stanley and how a painting then has a poem written on it, a generation, 2 generations, 100 years later, and then a colophon, and then the stamps, the chops of the owners who, you know, the people who own the painting over time and so on, sort of the openness of the aesthetic, you know, that is inclusive. What I was saying a moment ago with this idea that experience is what is real. All experience is real. You know, there's no reality-appearance distinction. Experience itself is real. And experience always entails the human being and the world. And so when the Confucians say this is consummate humanities, humanity, you know, a person in the number 2, like consummate humanity is us in our relationships, the Taoist comes along and says, you know, kiss your dog, you know, hug a tree, you know, that it's bigger than just us people, you know, that the world itself is magnificent. And then you have a Confucian response. You have the Zhongyong, you know, where the human being goes cosmic, where the human being is a co-creator with the heavens and the earth, you know. It starts off very slow. By the time that you get to the end of the Zhongyong, it's Beethoven's 9th. You know, you have Ode to Joy, you know. It literally bursts into song, the Book of Songs, you know, that the human being, you know, participates in moving, you know, the fabric, you know, of the cosmos, the warp and the weave, and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just a magnificent document. And so the idea that the human experience is in the world. Another thing that Stanley said was that you know, writing characters or painting a painting or writing poetry, this is all the same thing in some sense. And when you look at the language that you use, you talk about the shoulders of a character. You talk about you know, the character is a body. You know, one person who's really good to read on this is John Hay. You know, we have a book called Self and Image in Asian Theory and Practice. I'll send you a copy. I have a whole bunch of them on my shelf. They remaindered it, and they gave me them for $1 each. It's for you, Jeffer. I'll send you a copy when I get home. I'll write it down. But he uses that kind of language. I mean, the language of the body to talk about. When we talked about how we have to revise, if we begin from relationality, then words like root, words like nature, human nature, words like potential, source, but also cause. Like in this Chinese tradition, this notion of shi means momentum, configuration, purchase, power, timing. It has all of these different, like it has a space-time kind of idea, but it is the alternative to our sense of cause. Well, what this means is that everything is present in the totality of the effect. If we want to understand Stanley, then we have to take into account everything. Everything has relevance to this masterpiece called Stanley. So a different sense. A different sense of causality, but it's a causality that is founded in this notion of E. which has to do with husbandry. It has to do with farming, using Stanley's language. And then 艺术, art is cultivation. And so, but it's cultivating the entire garden, living, so that any particular gesture has implicated in it the totality of things. If you go to Beijing University, the place where the residences are is called Xiaoyuan. A xiaozi is a spoon, and a xiaoyuan is a garden in a spoon. The whole idea that in any one place you have implicated in it the totality. In the Tao Te Ching, it's chapter 47. It says, "The further you go, the less you know." That you have to take care of these relationships, and then when you go somewhere, then you take it with you. When you were talking about nature and the solitary person, in the Zhuangzi, there's a wonderful story of Confucius goes to see Lao Tzu, and he says, "I'd like to be your student. I'd like to learn from you, Lao Tzu." And Lao Tzu says, "I don't mind teaching you, but what am I supposed to do with all of these other people? That whenever you go anywhere, you take everybody with you, your family and your teachers and that you're a community. And that's always there. When that solitary person on the rock is a whole bunch of people."
Maybe one thing to throw into that mix is
Stand up here, because they want to film you.
one thing you might throw in from a Buddhist perspective is, this notion of the solitary sage standing on the cliff. He's looking outward. Well, in the Chan Buddhist tradition, you have this notion of the true person of no rank. So Linji, the famous Chan master, says, what we really aspire towards is to be this true person of no rank. Literally, it would be a true person without any position, not positioned in one place or another. So not being a father, not being a minister, not being a mother, not being a brother, having no particularity imposed on you at all. And Westerners read that and they think, God, that's all about independence and being, a free individual exercising agency and choice and so on. And that's not at all what they were talking about. They're talking about responsive virtuosity. So the Chan master, the freedom from not having a position means utter responsivity. And so I think if you go to the Chinese and you see how they work with binomial concepts like Tiyong, would be another thing you could bring up in this context, where you've got the same term, so-called body, reappearing again and again, and you could interpret that as body, as substance, and then Yung becomes function, and you've got the separation between form and function, and that's not at all what the Chinese are talking about. Or Li Shi, sort of principle and the circumstances, or the principle and the phenomena. Those are always understood together as a relational dynamic. So I think, what we're struggling with is to move away from this sort of entitative ontology, where what's basic is things, and then they have relationships, and the relationships can end or be put together in different ways. And instead of starting with relationships as basic, it's relational all the way down. So if you have a truly relational ontology, the question is never how much agency do you have when you make choices, when you not make choices. It's freedom no matter choice and how much choice you have. It's not about that at all. It's about the responsive virtuosity that you're able or not able to demonstrate. So we would valorize the infant as being truly free, untraveled by concepts and thinking and all the rest of it. And, Buddhism, sometimes you hear about the beginner's mind of the infant. But then they'll go on to say, and they're the most immature, self-centered creatures on the planet. They cry, they want to be fed immediately. They don't do anything for themselves. They're totally dependent, and yet they're screaming at you to give them what they need. This is not a model for being a true human being. It's that responsive virtuosity that takes a mature understanding of that relationship between T, your embodiment of the situation, your functions. So I think it all kind of connects together.
The whole idea, like when you got that idea of the noun, with a substance ontology, and then a verb, but instead of that a gerund. If you think gerundifiely, then form becomes rhythm. That form is the cadence of the human experience. There's a heartbeat, And rhythm that is musical is responsiveness. You know, jazz, a riff, playing in, getting into the music, listening, and then coming in and then working the music together.
And that's precisely what the importance of the brush stroke is in Chinese painting. I mean, the brush is the playing out, the living out of rhythm. It's responsiveness. And that's in a sense when I was talking about Shitao yesterday, the Yihua, the one brush stroke. He says we have to get back to that. What he sees in this sort of excessive, his point of view, veneration of the past is actually not understanding, you know, this intergenerational transmission. We're missing something. You know, what we're missing is this is limiting us in a fashion where we're no longer responsible. We're no longer good partners with the world of mountains and streams. We're not paying any attention to that. And so we've lost the brushstroke. Well, it's the brushstroke. The brushstroke is a way of responding. You know, and it's infinitely open, and yet at the same time it has a persistent structure. It's a shape. It's physical. It's not an abstraction at all. It's a receptiveness. And in that receptiveness is a kind of then giving.
And it's entirely appropriate that we end this session on this kind of improvisation, you know, the musicality of going back and forth. Just one final thing, and that is that the notion of poverty doesn't have to do with not having anything. It has to do with not having anything to give, you know. That there's a responsiveness that is there. But
we have lunch waiting for those of us who are in the China cohort, and our speakers. The lunch is served for us. But anybody else who wants to join us for a conversation, you could run over and get yourself a lunch. You're very welcome to do that until 11 o'clock. So, but anyway, let's give Roger.